Without further ado, I'll invite my husband Bruce up for the message today.
Thank you. Perfect. Hey, it's always good to get a golf clap, you know. It definitely builds confidence. So this week's Parsha is Vayishlach, and there's just an awful lot of stuff in there. And, of course, we always say that, but there really is. I think there's probably 100 teachings and 10,000 applications for our lives, so it's really overwhelming to try to figure out what to talk about. So, and even to do a summary got a bit daunting, but I attempted to do a summary, so I'm going to ask you to, if you have a Bible, turn to Genesis 32, and we're going to do maybe a scan, a speed read, and my thought on that is you can't absorb it all, but just be reminded, if you're like myself, sometimes you're not faithful in reading your parshas. Sometimes we tend to camp out in one part of the Bible and we don't really move around like we should. And again, I'm the guiltiest of all of that. But basically, it's all about Jacob. And he's constantly in the frying pan and into the fire, and then back into the frying pan, and then back into the fire. But this parsha just sort of continues that frying pan stuff. And remember, going back just a little bit, he had to flee Esau's wrath. He gets married. He has a whole pile of kids. He works for 20 years. And then he flees Uncle Laban. Uncle Laban then chases after him. And God intervenes for Jacob and keeps Laban in line. So, and I might sound a little irreverent, but in talking to the kids, I'm not great at genealogy, but there's a lot of genealogy in the Bible. And you'll say, well, that's Jacob's uncle, Uncle Laban. And it just helps to remember that, because Rebekah and Laban were siblings, right? So again, getting there into 32, Jacob's finally heading back after a 20-year absence. And also remember back that Rebekah had said, Jacob's mom, hey, leave. I'll let you know. I'll send for you when Esau has simmered down, right? When Esau's anger has abated, and it'll be safe to come back. But he never got that word from Rebekah. And it turns out Rebekah had already died. And so the word didn't come. So he got out of the frying pan of Laban, and now he's getting into the fire of Esau and not knowing what's ahead of him. So what's Jacob do? He's accumulated a lot of wealth. He's worked really hard. God has really blessed him. He sends groups of hundreds of animals ahead of him with servants saying, hey, Esau, this is from Jacob, and it's a gift to you. And what's the good word that comes back? Yeah, Esau is coming to meet you, and he's got 400 guys with him. And there's lots, often you'll hear that they're armed. I didn't read it as that they're armed, but you can probably assume that they were. I don't think, those guys were just wandering around with nothing. So they probably were armed. There's even some thought that it was 400 guys that were in charge of guys, right? So there could have been thousands of them. We don't know for sure, but either way, we know that Jacob was more than a little nervous about it. He was really upset. So what's he do? He sends the gifts. Doesn't seem like that may work very well. So his second line of defense is he divides his families into two. And if you read through this parsha, you'll see that he doesn't always treat Leah very well. So, but he's got Leah in one camp with children, animals, servants, Rachel in the other camp. He divides them up. And then he sends everyone across the river, and somehow, and I don't know why, I don't know if it got late in the day and he just had to stay, but he stayed across the river. Everyone was on the other side, on Esau's side, and he was by himself overnight. And of course, we have the famous story where he wrestles an angel at night. Some people think that angel was Esau's guardian angel, because later when he sees Esau, he said it's like seeing the face of God to see Esau again. Others, I don't necessarily agree with this, think that it might have been Yeshua. Some think just an angel. And then there's the angel of the Lord. And I haven't done a great study on this, but, remember when the three guys came past Abraham's tent, right? And they're like angels, but it turns out it was Adonai. So there is some thought that, hey, there's a manifestation of the Father that would be described as an angel. So maybe we just don't have enough words to describe God, and that's the problem. So he wrestles the angel all night. He says, bless me. The angel's like, hey, I got to go. The sun's coming up, and Jacob won't let go. So the angel, dislocates his hip, basically. Some people think that he had that limp, and then he was limping. They think he had the limp his whole life, but it doesn't say anywhere that he has the limp his whole life. But for sure, when he saw Esau, when he's supposed to come up against Esau potentially, what's he doing? He's limping, right? That doesn't project strength at all. So that limp could have been a blessing in disguise, right? We all, I'm doing many drashes all along here, but sometimes our limps are for our own good, right? We want to rail against God and whine and moan about our physical handicaps, our mental handicaps. Why can't I be more like this? Why can't I do that? Why don't I have what so-and-so has? But, we have to remind ourselves to trust the Father that he knows what limps we need to have. He knows how to keep us on the right path. So anyway, the angel wrenches his hip, and then the angel blesses him and gives him a new name. No longer be called Jacob, but Israel. Y'all still with me in your Bibles? Maybe, maybe not. It's a lot, and that's why it's like, how do you just blow past all of that? And I'm not really blowing your mind here. Just really want to say, take some time to read it. It's really foundational to our faith, and it would be good to take a good long look at it. So anyway, moving along, turns out that Jacob's plan of sending gifts ahead of him worked, and they have a tearful reunion, which is surprising. And then Esau says, hey, come on back home, brother. And Jacob says, well, you know the story. The livestock are young, the children are young. We can't move as fast as you. We're not coming back. And a lot of people want to kind of put Jacob into that deceiver category over and over and over again, right? And but I think Jacob did the right thing, right? He would not be a good choice to go back with Esau. And we know that Esau his whole life kind of made bad choices, right? He picked not great wives to marry. He married from the pagans, essentially, right? And obviously his parents were not happy about it. And I'm guessing they had something to say about it before he married. The Bible doesn't go into detail, but we know that it was that Isaac and Rebekah were not happy about it and caused a lot of strife. So Jacob decides no, I'll just slow down here. Again, there's some thought that Jacob's not a liar. He'll fulfill that promise in the Messianic era, which is possible, right? God's not limited by time. Now, where did I go here? All right. So Jacob, he says no. So he buys some land near Shechem. And again, just point out that, hey, he actually purchased the land. He didn't just say, I'm here, I'm bigger than you, stronger than you. I'll take it. No, he bought it. And just a few weeks back, my thoughts on that were God said, hey, I'm giving you the land, right? Well, why did you have to buy it? Well, sometimes we have to do things for God to fulfill what he wants to do. It doesn't always, or rarely does it go without a cost, right? He had to buy the land. And then here's one that's not in very many children's Bibles, also known as no children's Bibles. Dinah is violated by the prince of Shechem. And then Shimon and Levi, what do? They convince all of the men to get circumcised, and then they slaughter them. All right? So I don't know how many frying pan of fires here. There must be like 20 or 30 so far. So Jacob's like, what were you guys thinking? You know, this is horrible. You're going to cause us to get destroyed. And so they move on to go back to Bethel. And Jacob kept his vow to tithe to the Lord there. And then on the way, of course, Rachel dies while giving birth to Benjamin and is buried near the road, by the road near Bethlehem. And finally, Jacob goes to see his dad. And you kind of forget all about Isaac here. There's so much action. Meanwhile, Dad has been in Hebron, and, it's been 20-plus years. Remember, he was blind and basically bedridden all that time ago, and here he's still on the scene. But Isaac lives to 180 years old. He dies at 180, and that's more or less 40 years after the blessing. So 40 years have gone by. And if, again, remember back, Esau had vowed to do Jacob harm when Isaac finally died. But amazingly, if you keep that fresh in your mind, Jacob and Esau, they bury their father together. And, sometimes things get a little crazy at funerals, right? And estate settlements and things like that. I mean, just about everyone has a story about it. But somehow, whether it was some measure of righteousness in Esau or God, again, just intervening, Esau played nice. And then also, amazingly, the land's crowded. So you have these two nations, right? There were two nations in the womb. They get crowded. So Esau removes himself from the land. And in Obadiah, you're talking about he went up into the mountains, and that was called Edom. And so that's kind of amazing. And then, finally, the whole last chapter is dedicated to Esau and his descendants. Again, it's kind of amazing. You get a whole chapter in the Bible, this guy. So somehow it's important. I'm not claiming to understand why. And, we do want to make Esau the bad guy. And I'm not saying that he's not the bad guy, but it did say that, he was going to be a great nation. And it turns out he was. It also turns out that he continued his descendants to misbehave. So which of those 100 things are we going to talk about? And again, I know it's kind of chunk. I mean, me and the two older boys after Shabbat meal last night, we just kind of went through and talked about it. Uncle Laban and things like that. And it's helpful to do that. It seems really simplistic. It seems kind of silly. But that is a good way to learn and just start running through it and talking about it. A lot of the names we don't give a lot of weight to, but behind every name there's a story, right? So we got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but we got Andrew and Alan and Esther and Ryan. There's a story associated with each of our names, and sometimes that's a little bit horrifying for myself. But there could be a book written about each of our lives, right? It may not be a very long book. It may not be that exciting. But everything that we're doing, God's taking note of, right? And everything that happens to us, God knows already what's going to happen. He knows what he's going to do to help us. So it's good when you think of those genealogies and these stories. I mean, yes, we're focused on them, but try to remember that someone's writing a book about you also. So again, it's a little bit, sometimes you don't want to think about that, but it's good to put it in that perspective. So what I wanted to talk about, and I borrowed heavily from First Fruits of Zion's Unrolling the Scroll. I'll confess already, because when you see me trying to explain Greek and things like that, you know that I probably didn't, do that on my own. But so we'll work through that. So again, Jacob, he's returned to Bethel, the house of God. That's where he had the dream, the ladder reaching to heaven, remember? He kept his vow by building an altar to the Lord and sacrificing on it. Remember, he had not 2 pennies to rub together, as far as I can tell. When you're using a pillow for a rock, you've kind of hit rock bottom. And but so God did increase him. He did bless him. He did provide for him abundantly. And so the Lord again appeared to him. He blessed him. He repeated the name change from when he wrestled God. If you remember where we started back in chapter 32, he changed his name. And Jacob got a bad memory. He couldn't remember. No, but God wanted to remind him that he had changed his name. And if we pull up Genesis 35:10, back in the back, let's see. Oh, I'm holding. I'll read it to you while you find it. God said to him, "Your name is Yaakov, but you will be called Yaakov no longer. Your name will be Israel." Thus he named him Israel. So again, he reaffirmed his name change. The Lord blesses him with the blessings he had given to Abraham and Isaac. He tells him that he shall sire kings and that the land of Canaan will belong to him and his descendants. He tells him a nation and a group of nations, or a company of nations, some versions have it. A group of nations shall come from you. Genesis 35:11. God further said to him, "I am El Shaddai. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation, indeed a group of nations, will come from you. Kings will be descended from you." And I know I'm repeating things you guys already know, but it's in the name of sinking in, right? Getting it a little better set in your mind. Repeating it, right? And losing your place. So, back in Genesis 26, the similar blessings, same blessing for Yitzhak. God was telling him, don't go down to Egypt, but stay in this land. Genesis 26:4. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. I will give all these lands to your descendants, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth will bless themselves. So go back at 35:11. A group of nations will come from you. And 26, by your descendants all the nations of the earth will bless themselves. And of course we go back to the father of our faith, Abraham. He was Avram at the time. Genesis 12:1-3. Now Adonai said to Avram, "Get yourself out of your country, away from your kinsmen, and away from your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you are to be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, but I will curse anyone who curses you, and by you all the families of the earth will be blessed." It kind of struck me that the blessings are very similar, and you're like, yeah, that's Abraham's blessing, and so it has to pass through. But obviously Isaac and Jacob had heard the blessing, right? I'm pretty sure they talked about it, at least here and there. It wasn't a family secret. But God personalized it for each person, right? They didn't just say, the blessing for your dad or the blessing for your granddad, you're going to participate in that. No, it just felt like and it seems to me that he's reminding them, he's making it personal. And, you could extrapolate from that the Father makes it personal for each of us as well. It's not that we're as important as Abraham, but we're called as well. And there are specific promises and blessings that the Father has for us, and he personalizes that to each person. And so some things bear repeating, right? He could have just said, the blessing for Abraham. No, he repeated it. He applied it to each individual, to Isaac and then to Jacob. So if we look back at Genesis 35:11 again, we know the answer, but why does God say a nation and a group of nations? And it was probably more than a hint, but this is Lancaster's word. The Lord hinted that Israel would one day include many nations. The passage refers to the Gentile believers from all nations who would one day be grafted into the nation of Israel. So the Hebrew phrase for company of nations or group of nations is kahal goyim. The Hebrew word kahal means assembly or congregation. And it is the word that after being translated to Greek is ecclesia. And in the New Testament, it's translated into our English Bibles as church. When you read about Edom being destroyed in Obadiah, think about Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed. God does judge a nation as a nation, but always I think there are individuals inside that nation that are righteous. And that's the beauty of the church, right? That is, in a sense, our new nation, not a replacement for Israel now. We'll back that up real fast. But there is a connection there. So it's as if God said to Jacob, your name will be Israel, and a nation, the Jewish people, and a congregation of nations, the Gentile believers, will come forth from you. Of course, this does not mean that Gentile believers are the physical descendants of Jacob. It means like Abraham, Jacob is the spiritual father of the non-Jewish believers through their faith in Messiah. If you're Jewish, you already know that you have a physical inheritance in Israel because you are a descendant of your forefather Israel, Jacob. If you're a Gentile believer, however, you should not regard yourself as being left out of the people of God. You too have a spiritual inheritance in Israel. Jacob is your spiritual ancestor. And just as his name was changed from Jacob to Israel, you too have undergone a transformation through your faith in Messiah Yeshua. And you have been given a share in the name of Israel as well. And it's like, yeah, amen, it's true. But then I think that God reminded me of Andrew's, he's not in here, his world-famous lentil stew. Well, matzo ball this week, but the other week was the lentil stew. Remember Esau, he was out hunting. He came in, he was tired and hungry, and he wanted something to eat. And Sam will tell you, if I come home at 2, I want to eat. If I come home at 7, I want to eat. It doesn't really matter the time. It's just like impulsive. But it pointed to Esau's lack of respect for his birthright, right? We know the story that the birthright wasn't intended for him, but in the natural, automatically Esau would have gotten the birthright. They didn't just flip a coin to see which. I don't remember which twin came out first. No, that was a big deal from birth, and so there's gravity of you have been given a share in the name Israel as well, and I think for myself and a lot of people, we treat it like that bowl of stew, right? Or there's a bowl of stew on the line, and we don't really think about the gravity of what it means to be grafted in. Or even, I'm not Jewish, but to speak, to have an inheritance in Israel, right? We forget about what a big deal it is and the gravity of that, the weightiness of it. And so I was reminded to not trade my birthright for lentil stew or anything else in this world. And that there's responsibility that comes with being grafted in. It's not just a casual, put me onto the tree, take me off of the tree, put me on, you know what I mean? And again, I'm not saying anything that we don't already know, but I think it's good to remember that it's a big deal. And it's not that we have to be glum and grumpy, but it's a big deal. So anyway, that's all I have for you guys. I know it was a lot, but try to find time to read through again. Torah Club is looking at the Gospels this year, which is awesome, amazing. But it's tempted to say, hey, I put so much work into that study this week. I don't have time for the Torah, right? But the Torah is the foundation of the Gospels. So I pray that God would give us the strength, the energy, the time, the desire to continue studying. And I appreciate you guys, and Shabbat Shalom.
All right, Shabbat Shalom.